Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to join us. I had an interesting phone call this week, and I'd like to say a special hello and thank you to all the troops of the SF units down in North Carolina that are watching our program. I received a phone call from one of their soldiers, and basically they told me that we are right on. They very much enjoy the information that we are presenting, and they encouraged us with their words of gratitude, and I just want to say a special thank you to them. I will not mention any military units, but you know who I am speaking to, and we say thank you very, very much. The other end, folks, I wanted to let you know that here at the studio we have developed a website that you can go to communicate with us, and I'm very, very excited about this. Basically, if you just want to say hello, if you'd like to critique our format, or if you would like us to research any subject matter, or get into more depth or repeat some information that we may have presented previously, you can go to what'sgoingon911@gmail.com. Now that's all small lowercase, it's all one word. Again, that is what'sgoingon911@gmail.com. And my friends, please make use of this. We are always looking for feedback so we can critique what we're doing. We'd like to know what you have interest in and what information you will act upon. So again, that is what'sgoingon911@gmail.com. And we look forward to hearing from you. And that's why we went out of our way here to set this up. Okay, we are going to be getting into, as I promised you last week, we're going to be getting into the subject matter of guns with regards to what was the intention in their own writing of the founding fathers, the states, the people. What was the understanding of the language and the intent of the language? And that's what the primary of this show is going to be about today. But before we get into that, I thought there was a couple of things that you may be interested in. And one of them is this. I have been reading what has become to be known as the Fiscal Cliff new bill. And I will tell you, I haven't read the whole thing. I've been reading this quite diligently, in all honesty, driving my wife crazy. But the big summarization I want to tell you so far is that this. One, for every dollar of actual cuts, so for every single dollar of actual cuts. Now, I probably shouldn't be using the word actual, and let me tell you why. When the government says to you that they are cutting a bill or a funding, a lot of the time what it is it's pure projection. And what I mean by that is this. The budget of the United States government, it's already preset from the 90s, and we've discussed this before, that automatically it goes up by 7% a year. Okay? We're talking trillions of dollars here, my friends. It's automatic. It's in the clause from the Clinton era that anytime the budget automatically goes up by 7% a year. Boy, don't you wish you could go up to your boss and say, hey, I automatically want to get a 7% pay raise every year. Doesn't quite work out that well, does it? But for every cut that is projected or actual, for every dollar, there is a $41 increase that I have discovered so far. Now, I want you to think about that. They constantly talk about we have to cut back, but my friends, for every single dollar, and if you've been watching this show, you know we don't have dollars, but let's go along with the game. For every dollar of cuts in the fiscal cliff legislation that I have discovered so far, there is $41 worth of actual more cost, and I should say tax increases, to be truthful with my language. Okay, just so I have that down and you make sure you understand this. So for every $1 they're saying they're cutting, what they're not telling you is that there is $41 for every $1 of cutting in tax increases. And the other thing that they've been saying to you, this is only going to affect the wealthy. Well, my friends, from people who are a lot smarter than me and have the resources to really tear apart this legislation, according to these sources, it is going to affect 77% of the population of the United States will see tax increases. So if you want to get your information from the Dog and Pony Show and the puppets that the money masters put out there for you to be entertained by, go ahead and do that. But take a look at the real issue, and take a look at your paycheck, and take a look at the purchasing power, how it's being reduced from the medium of exchange that you call a dollar, but is not a dollar. It's actually a Federal Reserve note. And what's a note? An acknowledgement of debt. And beyond all that, my friends, you have to pay these very same bankers an interest bond due on every one of these notes because they gave us permission to print it. Okay, another little subject matter I thought was quite interesting. And I think you may recognize this name from watching this program. Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein, and that's Blankfein, recently testified in front of Congress. And what did Mr. Blankfein have to say to Congress? Mr. Blankfein has urged Congress and President Barack Obama to cut Social Security and Medicare, urging that the program cannot afford to keep funding longer modern retirements. You know, I found that very interesting, and I'm going to tell you why. Because when I did a little bit of research, I discovered that Mr. Lloyd Blankfein received over $16 million in 2011 alone by you paying the taxpayer or top fund bailout. So understand this, my friends. This man received over $16 million from you paying into this facade known as the top. And he has the gall to get out in front of the Congress that supposedly represents your best interest and tells them that we have to cut Social Security and Medicare because they just can't afford it. Now, if you've been watching this program, you understand that the bank has got $28.3 trillion that we can account for. We don't really know the absolute number. That we can account for is $28.3 trillion with a T dollars. And this guy has the gall to go in front of Congress and sit down with Barack Obama and say, hey, we need to cut Social Security and Medicare. Didn't say we have to cut Medicaid, because Medicaid is for people who are on welfare, haven't contributed to the system. Social Security and Medicare are for people who have worked all their lives and contributed to the system. So what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that's going to happen? I can assure you it will. They have already raised the retirement age where you can start collecting benefits. And now if you read legislation, my friends, you will see that they are about to raise it up to 72 years old. That you are going to have to be 72 years old prior to collecting any Social Security benefit. And for the people who are in their 20s and you're constantly paying into this as-you-go system, ask yourself, do you really think it's going to be there for you when you reach 72? Who knows, by then it'll probably be 84 before you can collect. Just thought you might be interested in that. Okay, another thing I wanted to keep you, I told you I would keep you updated on because this whole thing smells like a rat, and that is what took place down in Newton, Connecticut, known as the Sandy Hook shootings. And there was a couple other things that we announced last week when you told you to go on the internet and find a bunch of things. There was something else I found rather very disturbing. And I got to sort of throw a caveat out there that maybe this parent, if he was a true parent of this horrific event, maybe he's psychologically traumatized by this whole event. But go on the internet, and you can punch, it's on there, I looked this morning, it was still there, and you can punch in Newtown, Connecticut parent told to read the card. And what they're talking about is this. This parent is going to the podium to speak to the press, and he is laughing like he just heard the greatest joke on life. And he's laughing, and now he doesn't know he's being recorded at this point, and there's a gentleman right to his right, and he has a card, and the gentleman comes up, and he's laughing, and they're having a good old time like they're out having drinks. And the guy hands him a card, and as he approaches the podium, his whole attitude changes. He gets serious, and the gentleman who hands him the card says to him, and I quote, "Just read the card." I found that very suspicious and very disturbing. Now, besides all the other things that haven't added up, I want you to listen to this. A professor has stirred controversy at Florida Atlantic University with claims that last month's Newton, Connecticut shootings did not happen as reported. James Tracy asserts, Professor James, Tracy, asserts in radio interviews and on his memoryholeblog.com that trained crisis actors may have been employed by the Obama administration in an effort to shape public opinion in favor of the event's true purpose, which he claims is gun confiscation. As documents, this is him speaking, as documents relating to Sandy Hook shooting continue to be assessed and interpreted by independent researchers, there is a growing awareness that the media coverage of the massacre of the children and adults was intended primarily for public consumption to further larger political ends. I found that extremely interesting, especially after watching this parent, supposed parent, come up to the screen. He is laughing, folks. I don't know what they're laughing about, but he's laughing. He's having a good old time. And all of a sudden, he goes up, and the person says to him, "Just read the card." He walks up to the podium, and he's got crocodile tears. What words did this guy use, Mr. Professor James Tracy? Crisis actors. Found that very, very interesting. Okay. Here's something else when I was doing some research I found interesting. Thomas Nee, a member of Vice President Joe Biden's gun control task force, which has been created by President Obama in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Connecticut. Nee's son, Joseph Nee, was convicted for planning to commit a mass murder of students and teachers at Marshfield High School in Massachusetts, similar to that of Columbine in 1999. Does anybody see a problem with this? Let me read that again. Thomas Nee, a member of Vice President Joseph Biden's gun control task force, which was created by President Obama in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Connecticut. Nee's son, Joseph Nee, was convicted for planning to commit mass murder of students and teachers at Marshfield High School in Massachusetts, similar to that of Columbine in 1999. Nee admitted to police the plan involved taking ammunition, guns, and explosive devices into the school, securing the school's exit doors with bicycle locks, and then shooting students and staff. Very interesting. Okay, that was our little bits of information I wanted to get out before we get on to our main topic today, which is exactly that, gun control. So, my friends, I thought that I would go back into the last century and while I was doing some research on this, I started taking some tallies. What do you think it was the number one cause of death in the 1900s, or as we know it as the 20th century? It was government. How can I say such a thing? Over 290 million people have been accounted for. We don't know the true number because it probably escalates well over 300 million. Over 290 million people, according to multiple sources, say and prove in documentation that government has killed over 290 million people of the 20th century. So with that in mind, I said, well, you know, what are some of the more famous ones? Adolf Hitler, National Socialist leader and Reich Chancellor of Nazi Germany. And we got into the whole thing how Hitler was elected Chancellor and then burned the Reichstag, and then through the Enabling Acts created what we know as the position of Führer, and then appointed himself Führer. We also know that Hitler had another operation called Operation Gleichschwitz, where on the German-Polish border, he used German soldiers dressed up as Polish soldiers, attacked a radio station, let the people at the radio station broadcast openly about the attack, then killed them all, and then the people rallied to the cause of invading Poland. My friends, we have talked about this a lot of times in this program, the Hegelian dialectic. Crisis, reaction, solution. Create the crisis, get the emotional response you want from the people. The best two that work are anger and or fear. And then you go and you provide the solution, which always strengthens their authority and restricts your liberties. It works very, very well. So Adolf Hitler, National Socialist leader, Reich Chancellor of Nazi Germany during his horrific 12 years rule, he was responsible for the unleashing the bloodiest war ever to scourge mankind. Like all good socialists, Hitler consolidated and sustained his power by killing anyone who opposed him. Folks, if you think that it's just they kill anyone who opposes them, look into the Night of the Long Knives. All right? Look into the Night of the Long Knives. When the brown shirts started to gain too much independence and too much power from Hitler and his people, that were, you know, his direct command, he actually killed them. He actually killed his own people. Now, and that should send a wave of horror through you, because what government has declared the people of the United States for the 1933 Trading with the Enemies Act, which we have read verbatim to you on this program multiple occasions? Yes, that's right, the United States government. In addition, he commanded his minions to carry out the most widespread racial genocide ever perpetrated. By applying the practices of industrial assembly line, some 6 to 8 million people described as subhumans were executed in extermination camps, which were constricted for no other purpose. My friends, my father-in-law, God bless him, was in Auschwitz and Dachau, and they were sold to this as, of course, my father-in-law's father was part of the resistance in Poland, and he always called them the labor camps. That's how they were sold. They were sold as the labor camps. In addition, uncounted millions of Christians, Poles, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others were I'm just going to read this verbatim to you, were described as terrorists. They were terrorists, folks. The people who stood up against this whole horrific thing that was taking over Germany, they were described as terrorists. Well, what does the United States government, who's the big terrorist in the United States government's eyes? Okay, let's read it. We've read it to you before. Returning veterans, homeschoolers, constitutionalists, Second Amendment people. Why? Why would they be considered terrorists? Because they're against what's going on, and they've educated themselves. Okay. I won't get into it. Describes about how basically they were hanged, beaten to death, gassed, and so forth. The death toll, by the way, attributed to his regime because of the war that he supposedly created. I will be honest with you, I wish these people did some research, and they will discover that we financed Hitler. We created this whole thing. When I say we, I'm talking about American and English bankers. But the death toll from that war, basically at the hands of the Germans, was 20 million people. This is in addition to approximately 50 million people that perished directly as a result of military operations in Europe. So you got 50 million people who died from the war. You got 20 million people who perished directly from military operations within the European theater. Chairman, and let's keep in mind, we put him into power. We financed the Third Reich. We've gone over this with you before. We financed the Third Reich through the Brown Brothers Harriman Union Bank out of New York. We financed the Third Reich through IV Farben receiving all of their fuels and stuff they needed from Saccone, Standard Oil Company of New York, a Rockefeller company. And we also went along with the whole thing with regards to letting Hitler do what he did with regards to the massacring of the people, the collecting of the people. You know, it's interesting, but when you study Hitler, you'll find out that you know where he learned this whole process of taking people, consolidating them, and putting in these labor camps? He learned it from the Boer Wars. And the Boer Wars was when the English were conquering Africa, particularly for the diamonds and so forth, the Boer Wars. And we had done that to the native Aborigines in Africa, the native people. Not we, I should say the English did. And this is where Hitler learned this whole thing. He learned the whole thing from the English, how to concentrate the people, put them in labor camps and so forth, how to control them. Of course, he also learned the Hegelian dialectic very well by burning the Reichstag and by Operation Gleichschitz to make the people desire the authority. Okay, let's talk about another person that we financed very well. Communist Party chairman and founder of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong, has the distinction of being listed as the Guinness Book of Records as the greatest mass murderer in human history. And we financed him. Because Red China was and is such a closed society, estimates of the numbers of those put to death in order to bring the benefits of socialism to the masses vary considerably. Most figures are constantly between 60 and 80 million people. While mass killings of the enemies of the state were apparently not as widespread as they were during the earlier years of his despotic rule, they do include the slaughter of the Cultural Revolution, which may have numbered well over a million of counter-revolutionaries. And my friends, you know who sold this Cultural Revolution? Look up, there was a gentleman by the name of Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek thought foolishly that the Americans really wanted another free society and another republic, if you would, in Asia. Foolish man. Anyway, we financed Mao Zedong. We took away, we gave all the intelligence we had on Chiang Kai-shek because he was sharing everything with us because he foolishly thought we were going to, you know, want to be for the benefit of the world and for the benefit of the Chinese people. And we wound up benefiting, I should say, helping, aiding and abetting Mao Zedong to kill millions of his people. And we wound up putting him on a little island known at the time as Formosa. You know that name of that island now as Taiwan. Again, we financed him. Okay. The next one we also financed, Joseph Stalin. Well earned his place in history as one of the most bloodthirstiest socialists. Is that not the third time? Communist, socialist? Well, what's going on with this? We have to think about the description of the type of government these people had. And basically Stalin simply picked up where Lenin left off, because we can't forget Lenin, because who financed Lenin? Even Trotsky came from New York, exterminating not only those who opposed his plans, but also those who thought capable of opposition. If you do some research on this, my friends, you will find out that basically between Lenin and Stalin, who we financed both, you're looking at just under 100 million human beings. And they did it a lot through the gulags, they did it through mass execution, but they also did it through starvation. They did it through starvation. What was that saying that lady from the UN said when we discussed Mogadishu before? When she said, "Food is power and we make no apologies for it." Absolutely. Okay? Again, we financed these four people. Now, the other one I had to add in because of my time in the Marine Corps and my time in Cambodia. Fortunately, I was there for a very short time, only 56 days, not like the poor guys that were in Vietnam that were there between 12 and 13 months. And then to think of the horrific welcome, or lack of welcome that they didn't get by the American people when they came home just enrages me. That's another subject for another time. But I had to bring this one up because of my personal experience there. The Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, during the 70s, Cambodia. Basically what happened, my friends, is that he killed over 2 million people in just under 3 years' time. And he did this by despotic rule. He did this by taking away their guns because the people, Southeast Asia at that time was in major war. And when you think about how long they were at war, my friends, that they started out with the Chinese, they wound up with the Japanese, they wound up with the French. You might have heard of French Indonesia at some point. And then after the French got thrown out of there after Dien Bien Phu, they wound up with the Americans for 14 years. So what is the first thing that old Mr. Pol Pot did? Was he disarmed his people. He disarmed his people. Became a despotic ruler and murdered over 2 million of them in just 3 years' time. And my friends, if you want to do the research, we financed him also. So, let's talk about we've always said, history is a barometer of where we're going in the future. So let's talk about that. And I just put some examples together here for you. Between 1915 and 1917, the Ottoman Turkish Empire murdered, estimated 1.5 million people. Okay? The date of the gun control laws was 1911. And I had to look this up. It's Article 166 Penal Code. Article 166 Penal Code. Okay? And the primary target of these people were educated people and Armenians. Soviet Union. Between 1929 and 1953, they murdered, again, we just talked about this, 20 million people. The date of the gun control law was 1929. And it was a penal code, and their article was 182. And their target was anti-communist, anti-Stalinist, and clergy. Nazi Germany and occupied Europe from 1933 to 1945. Excuse me. 13 million people directly. From 1928 to 1938, there was numerous gun control acts put in line. And the name of it was the April 12th Weapons Law, and then they have the March 18th Weapons Law. And the targets were Christians, resistors, Unionists, Gypsies, anti-Nazis, and Jews. China, from 1949 to 1976, there was numerous anti-gun legislation put in. Well over 20 million Chinese were murdered, as we just spoke about. The date, there was two major gun control laws when I was looking this up. And the first one actually began in 1935, but there was another real big one in 1957. And it was called the Security Law. Article 9, the security law. What did Ben Franklin say? Those who give up liberty for the sense of security will get and deserve neither. The main target was the anti-communist, rural populations, and pro-reform groups. Guatemala, 1960, over 100,000 Mayan Indians were massacred. The big gun control date was 1964, and the big legislation that I found was Decree number 36. Decree number 36. We have talked about that word. Decree means by the hand of authority. There was no voting on this. There was no legislative act. Decree 36 from November 25th, 1964, and there was another decree, 283. Uganda, Idi Amin. Oh yes, I didn't mention him. Guess what? We financed him too. 1971 to 1979, over 300,000, particularly the main target here, my friends, is Christians and political rivals. That's it. And the name of the act was the Firearms Ordinance Act. Cambodia, we just spoke of, particularly with Pol Pot, 1975. And this was also a decree act, Decree 322-8 out of their penal code. The estimates, the numbers that they have here, my friends, is just under 3 million people. And the only target listed was educated persons. So, what goes on with gun control? What is the American government, who has declared you the enemy, actually looking out for your own well-being? I want to say they're not. Why would they? Why would they? You're the declared enemy. They're bleeding you financially. They're restricting your liberties. They're poisoning you with the GMO food, the SV40 and the vaccinations, the chemtrails, the fluoride in the water. It goes on and goes on. But I thought I would just take some quotes from some names you may recognize here in the United States. Our task of creating a socialist America can only succeed when those who would resist us have been totally disarmed. The National Educator, January 1994, page 3. Folks, the National Educator is from the NEA, National Education Association, the union. Let me read that again to you. Our task of creating a socialist America can only succeed when those who would resist us have been totally disarmed. History, actually, I think I have a longer version of this quote. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subjected people to carry arms have prepared for their own fall. Adolf Hitler, 18 March 1939. The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subjected people to possess arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subjected people to carry arms have prepared for their own downfall by so doing. Indeed, I would go so far as to say that the supply of arms to the underdogs, is a sine qua non for the overthrow of any sovereignty. In other words, a necessity. So let's not have any native militia or native police. German troops, the German military alone will bear the sole responsibility for the maintenance of law and order through the occupied territories, with a system of military strong points which must be evolved to cover the entire occupied country. My friends, if you are disarmed, you are occupied. You are at the mercy, at the bequest of the entity that has disarmed you. 1935 will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead to the future. Adolf Hitler selling his anti-gun to the German people. And we should, then every community in the country could then start doing major weapon sweeps and then destroying the weapons, not selling them. President Bill Clinton. I am convinced that we have to have federal legislation to build on. We are going to have to take one step at a time, and the first step is necessary, given the political realities going to be very modest. Of course, it is true that politicians will then go home and say, this is a great law, the problem is solved. And so it is also true that such statements will tend to diffuse the gun control issue for a time. So then we'll have to strengthen that law, and then again to strengthen that law, and maybe again and again. Right now, though, we'd be satisfied with not with a half a loaf, but with a slice. Our ultimate goal is total gun control in the United States. It is going to take time. My estimate is from 7 to 10 years. The problem is to slow down the increasing number of guns sold in this country. The second problem is to get them all registered. And the final problem is to make the possession of all guns and ammunition, except for the military, policemen, licensed security guards, and licensed security guards, totally illegal. This is from the New Yorker, a public newspaper in the United States, written by a person named Peter Shields on July 26, 1976. When we got organized as a country and we wrote a radical constitution with a radical Bill of Rights, giving radical amount of individual freedom to Americans. And so a lot of people say there is too much personal freedom. When personal freedom is being abused, you have to limit it. And that's what we did in the announcement I made last week on the public housing projects, about how we're going to have weapon sweeps and more things like that to try to make people safer in their communities. Bill Clinton, speaking on MTV's Enough is Enough, March 22nd, 1994. Again, remember Hitler's statement? Our streets will be safer. Our police will be more efficient. And who's he selling it to? MTV, my friends, obviously is a younger viewing audience, if you would. You don't have many suspects who are innocent of a crime. That's contradictory. If a person is innocent of a crime, then he is not a suspect. That's Edward Meese III, Attorney General in the Reagan administration. We cannot be so fixated on our desire to preserve the rights of ordinary Americans. President Bill Clinton, USA Today, March 11th, 1993, page 2. I want you to listen to that. We cannot be so fixated on our desire to preserve the rights of ordinary Americans. And what did he swear to defend? What? Gun registration is not enough. Waiting periods are only a step. Registration is only a step. The prohibition and confiscation of private firearms is the ultimate goal. Attorney General Janet Reno, Bill Clinton administration. What good does it do to ban some guns? All guns should be banned. Senator Howard Mitzenbaum, Democrat out of Ohio. Folks, I've got a sheet of them here. I'm not going to go on. We're running out of time. As I promised you, I think you get the idea. I wanted to read to you now something. This is a constitutional study It's a great little book. But I wanted to talk about the militia and what the definitions of the militia was. And I'm just going to read this verbatim. In the states, in the 13 colonies, including later adapted by Vermont, as it was recognized as a separate state in 1791, the militia consisted of every able-bodied male from the age of 16 to 60. Let me read that again. From the 13 originating colonies, and they have them all down here, and later including the state of Vermont after it was recognized as a separate state in 1791, the militia consisted of every able-bodied male from the age of 16 to 60. That was the militia. The entire adult male population was armed. We know that many of the founding fathers, including Washington, Jefferson, and Mason, obviously they were very much for. I mean, Madison wrote pretty much the Constitution, and Jefferson wrote pretty much the Declaration of Independence. Okay? And folks, you know, interesting when you read this, you're not going to see anything about hunting. Okay? Now we get into Blackstone. William Blackstone placed the right to arms among the absolute right of individuals at common law. Those rights he saw as preserving the free government and the liberties of the people. Blackstone was referring to the individual's rights to have and use arms for self-protection. He describes the right to bear arms as being for self-protection and defense, and self-defense as being the primary law of nature, which cannot be taken away by the law of man. The natural right of resistance and self-preservation, when the sanctions of society and laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression. Folks, and this gets into something rather well, and that's why I brought it up. I don't need their permission to defend myself. It is my natural right. I mean, we have this whole mindset in this country now through the conditioning of sanctioned oppression and violence by the government. I don't understand it. You know, sanctioned oppression and violence by the government. Don't you have the natural right to protect you and your family and your property? You have to go get permission from the oppressors to defend yourself? And now these very same people who have declared you the enemy, who have come up with historically false flag operations here in the United States and abroad to create their means, to get the emotional response they want from you through the use of crisis at the expense of your children and your women and your friends and your family? Who says you have to? Why do you listen? I mean, who says you have to go get their permission to defend yourself? You are a human being. Remember, your rights are unalienable. I didn't say unalienable. They didn't come from some Martian in Mars or from some guy in Pluto. I said unalienable is the proper language. That's another play with words they do. Unalienable. Well, does that make, what's unalienable? No, they're unalienable. They're yours. They cannot be altered or taken away. As Blackstone said so well, right here, the natural right of resistance and self-preservation when the sanctions of society and laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression. The primary law of nature which cannot be taken away by the law of man. And by the way, if the government is supposed to be here to protect you, where are they? They're not doing such a good job, are they? And if there's such this big terrorist threat that we have in this country, that we got TSA in the airports, we got TSA on the railroads and stations, and now, my friends, yes, they just approved the funding 2 weeks ago, you're going to start seeing roadblocks of TSA on the highways. Because we have this big threat, this big terrorist threat, yet the borders are wide open. We can't put 4,000 troops on the Mexican border to protect our border, but we've got 28 to 30,000 troops since 1952 on the Korean border. Does that make sense to you? So what did the states say in their individual constitutions? Virginia, adopted June 12, 1776, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and self-defense of a free state. That standing armies in times of peace should be avoided, as they are a dangerous to liberty, and in all cases the military should be under strict subordination and governed by the civil power. What is the militia? Virginia signed on, every able-bodied man from 16 to 60. Delaware, September 1776, that a well-regulated militia is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free people. Pretty simple. They don't even go on. Pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Two words should jump out at you. Well, a couple of words here. One, militia, and number two, they keep saying the word natural. Natural. Folks, these people understood they weren't looking to their government for their rights. As Jefferson wrote, our rights are unalienable and we are all equal in them. It doesn't mean that I can run as fast as you or you can jump as high as me. It's not a statement of our physical abilities. It is a statement of ordained rights. We are all equal, and our rights are unalienable. We do not need permission from an entity that is supposed to be subordinate to our desires. Pennsylvania, September 28, 1776. That the people have a right to bear arms for defense of themselves and the state. And as standing armies in times of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up. And that the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Can they make it any more clearer? I mean, a fourth grader, even in the public school system, can understand this language. And that it was meant that way. It was meant that way. There is no question here what they're saying. The language is plain. The language is common day. It's not legalese to confuse you and put you in a state of delusion so they can manipulate you. Maryland, November 11th, 1776. That a well-regulated militia is the proper and natural defense of a free man. Again, very simple. What's the militia? Every able-bodied man, 16 to 60. North Carolina, December 18th, 1776. That the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of the state and as a standing army in time of peace, and as standing armies in the time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Vermont, July 8th, 1777. And if you want to know, this is Article 15 here. That the people have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and of the state. Now, I know that we are on in New Hampshire, and I know that we are on in Vermont. So let me read Vermont again to you. July 8, 1777, very simple. That the people have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. Massachusetts, the people have a right to keep and bear arms for the common defense. That's October 25th, 1780. New Hampshire, a well-regulated militia is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a state. Let me read New Hampshire again because I know we're on in New Hampshire. A well-regulated militia is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a state. Folks, another thing I have to talk about the language here. When you look up the word state, were they talking about the corporation that we are today? No. Remember we talked about the three definitions of state and all the United States and all that. Remember all that? There's three: the corporation, the state that makes up the union, and the geographical area that consists thereof. They are talking about the inhabitants of the geographical area and the state that makes up the union, because at that time, my friends, in 1780, 1784, 1776, and 1777, there was no corporation state. That did not take place until the Organic Act of 1871. So, my friends, three things that should jump out at you here. I won't go on with this because I unfortunately am running out of time. But there are some things here, and this is a great little book if you're interested in it. And this is called the Second Amendment Primer, and it's put out by Adams. Really fantastic, and it really breaks all the laws down. It breaks the intention. It breaks down language. It's phenomenal. I really highly recommend it. I'm not selling the book, my friends. I'm doing this as a way that you can go on with your research, okay? But you have to understand here the intent. First of all, they talk about the militia was part of the National Guard or the state guard, whatever you want to call it. First of all, the state, as we think of the state today, did not exist. It was not a corporation. They are talking about the geographical area and the inhabitants thereof, and they are talking about the state that makes up the Union, not the corporation United States. They talk about a natural right. A natural right. Folks, your rights come from God. You have rights as a human being, as a man. You have responsibilities as a man. You have obligations as a man. You have obligations to your family. You have obligations to your children's future. You have obligations to your community, to keep it safe, to defend it against oppression, at no matter which avenue that oppression approaches. And that is why when we took the oath, as all veterans did, to protect to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You have got to understand the language and not let these bureaucrats play with your language. Understand, I've always said, if you do not have a foundation of knowledge, they can take you down any road they desire to take you down. And they will play with the language. And I use the example of unalienable. What does that mean to you? Your rights are unalienable. No, my friends, your rights are unalienable. They cannot be taken away. They cannot be altered. They are absolutely yours. And we have to stop. You know, I put it this way to you, my friends. We as Americans have compromised ourselves into a corner. Over the years, with gun control, and by the way, if you want to do some reading, research the first big gun act in the country at the federal level. It was called the Gun Law of 1968. And while you're at it, my friends, if you really want to compare the language, I invite you to get the German gun laws of 1933 and compare them to the language of 1968, because all they did was transcribe the language from German to English. And if you don't believe me, I invite you to go online, go to YouTube, look up Senator Dodd from Connecticut, Senator Dodd Sr. from Connecticut. He did an awesome expose on it because he was against it at the time when it took place. I invite you to go to numerous websites. Gun Owners of America is one. Larry Pratt speaks very eloquently about the language and the intent. The Jews for the Preservation of Firearms. Again, I am saying this not to sell their organizations, but they offer some tremendous material that you can research. And think about this. Jews for the preservation of firearms. Now, if some of the Jews were prosecuted in the labor camps or extermination camps in Nazi Germany, no doubt about it. For those people who say there were no Jews, well, you're wrong. Documented history proves you're wrong. Were they all Jews? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, when you do the research, my friends, literally about 81% of the people that wound up in the German concentration camps were Catholic religion. They were Catholics. They were Christians. The Germans and the Poles are denominately a Catholic culture. Do your research. But some of the Jews did suffer horrifically, terribly. So the organization, Jews for the Preservation of Firearms, what do you think they understand through their ancestry? That once they were disarmed, they were at the bequest of the oppressor. What was it that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who used to live here in Vermont, said? We had no guns. If only we had met them at the door with pitchforks when they came to take us to the gulags. Now think of that. They were already disarmed. Then they start doing these night sweeps. They always came at night. Gee, I wonder who else comes knocking on your door always at night. Usually about 4 o'clock in the morning. That's their modus operandi. My friends, when you look at these horrific events that have gone on, Columbine, Texas, Connecticut, there's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of common denominators. There was always drills going on. They were always on psychotropic drugs, excuse me. Aurora, Colorado, all these people, they had handlers. The Murrah Building, Oklahoma, 9/11, New York City, ×2. Yes, 92 and 2011. Remember, we talked about how the FBI, this is in the New York papers, my friends. The FBI was caught hiring a retired Egyptian military colonel to carry on this operation. Go to Ted Gunderson's website, former FBI agent. He has all that on there. You must always ask yourself, qui bono? Who is benefiting from these events? Qui bono? And it's always interesting to me how a lot of this legislation is written prior to the event. My friends, we have compromised ourselves into a corner. We have nowhere to go but straight, directly, with strength, in unison, as one, out of that corner. We're against the wall. We have reached a time in history where we have compromised ourselves to a position of weakness. We are responsible for this. As always, we are very, very thankful that you take the time from your day to watch this program. And again, I want to say a special thank you to the people in the SF unit who called me down in North Carolina. God bless you. May God keep you safe. And as always, my friends, we close this program in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between